welcome Stephen Mitchell, founder of Sporting People, and Tim Hollingsworth, OBE and CEO, Sport England, to the stage.
I feel a long way away from you, Tim. Should we snuggle up? Or
It's deliberate, Steve.
Oh. Super. Good morning, everybody. Oh, wow. Happy hump day to you all. Tim, very good morning. Thank you.
Morning,
We
Mitch.
appreciate you joining us this morning in your busy schedule, and hopefully we're going to have some reflections, as it says, from halfway up the hill. I did think overnight, having listened to Hugo yesterday, that we just need to scrap that title, and Tim completely agrees, but I didn't veto putting it up there because we need to own it and talk about it, right? But anyone in the audience, feel free to classify where Tim and my's membership goes in Hugo's membership club at the end of this morning's session, because hopefully we're creating a new category.
I'm just guessing the gold sponsors get to watch the beach volleyball, is that right? I don't know.
No comment. So, format for this morning, Tim and I are just going to have a conversation about our roles and his role in particular, but a bit like I did yesterday, we're going to go human first. We're going to have a bit of fun because when I was growing up, all I wanted to do was be CEO of Sport England. But actually, Tim's just a human being, so let's find out a bit about Tim, right? So, Tim, would you like to share with us where your happy place is, please?
Well, first of all, good morning, everybody. I'm going to say that, certainly, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you this morning. And notwithstanding the feelings that people have got about the particular word allyship, I was really delighted that we're having this conversation. My happy place is probably halfway up the hill, actually, but it's a different hill. I'm very lucky to live in Bath, and we are quite close to Salisbury Hill. Those of you that are old enough to know Peter Gabriel's song will know all about Salisbury Hill. It's a beautiful place. It's always, whatever the weather, a fantastic place to be. And hopefully with our dog or dogs in tow, we could be having quite a happy walk up Salisbury Hill. That's where I'm happy. Or watching Fulham win.
Or watching Fulham win. It's more likely to be walking up and down there, all right. What's your favourite biscuit?
Oh, custard cream, no argument.
What are you listening to?
Right now, I'm such a centrist dad that anything that is the rest is as a podcast, but also I'm going back through a Beatles phase.
Wonderful. If I logged into your Netflix, what would I see?
Oh, Baby Reindeer. God, traumatic. But also Ripley, very slow-moving, very beautiful, very black and white.
If we were on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, who's your phone a friend?
Goodness. I didn't know you were going to say that. I don't know. I'm going to think about that.
On the notes.
I would say that my 19-year-old son, Ollie, because he knows everything that I don't know.
Wonderful. What's on your travel bucket list?
Much more of South America than the Brazil that I went to very luckily during the Paralympic days many times. And also probably going back to Greece eventually and trying to live on an island there.
If you were channeling your inner superhero or kids' cartoon character, who would it be?
Spider-Man, on the basis that I read an awful lot of books about Spider-Man about 20 years ago.
Wonderful. Last but not least, we are a few weeks out from the Paris Olympic and Paralympic Games. You got a golden ticket. Who are you going to go and see?
I would go, unquestionably, to the Paralympic table tennis. I would go and watch my friend Will Bailey, who is going for a 4th medal and I hope a 2nd gold. But also there's an incredible 15-year-old girl called Bly who trains down at an amazing place called the Brighton Table Tennis Club with Will. And she's not only qualified, but she's quite possibly going to become probably the greatest female table tennis player in Paralympic history as she grows up. I played 5 points against her. I got 1. I want to dine out on that one day.
Brilliant, super. Thank you for indulging me. Again, just to build on that, Tim, you've had a really interesting squiggly career, as we have discussed. Some people might not know your previous history beyond BPA or pre-BPA, so just talk us a bit about your career history, if you may.
Having done jobs across media and in consultancies, 20 years ago, actually, this year, I applied for a job as Director of Policy and Communications at UK Sport. and someone you probably never heard of called Sue Campbell, who was chair at the time, took a punt on me, for which I will be forever grateful. And I joined UK Sport 20 years ago in that role. I became Chief Operating Officer when Liz Nichol moved to being CEO. Two women, by the way, who've had an enormous influence on my career and life. And from that, I was then able to become part of this wonderful world of sport and sport administration, and the privilege that I was then able to take in 2011 when the role of chief, I wanted to lead. I wasn't sure why. I wanted to be part of something. I wanted to have the opportunity to change things and create the space for others to deliver, and the opportunity to lead the British Paralympic Association going into London was an extraordinary one, and taking that was probably the biggest squiggle line going towards CEO jobs and leadership, and did that memorably and forever, wonderfully for nearly 8 years before joining Sport England in late 2018. So year 6 for me in Sport England too. So I bring, I hope, an understanding of lots of things, but one of the greatest, talking to the topic, one of the greatest things about my ability to be a leader in sport was that I'm a bit rubbish at it. I'm not very good at anything. I was never a county standard this or an international that, or, I'm sitting with my chair, Chris Boardman, and I'm sitting opposite UK Sports chair and Catherine Granger, and you realise that you've got people with a lifetime of understanding what sport is. My job is to create the opportunity for people who do to be able to do it to the best of their ability, and I think my career brought some strengths, but it also gave me an absolute recognition that I should never, as I said at the BPA frequently, wear a tracksuit in anger. I should never try and be what I'm not, be in a dressing room, try and be a coach or whatever, because I didn't have that background. What I can do is I can hopefully create the space for others to maximise their abilities.
Wonderful, thank you very much. We are in the middle of Mental Health Week. Being the CEO and leader in any organisation is difficult. Tell us a bit about how you self-care and how you look after yourself away from the day job.
Probably not as well as I should. I think we're taking, it's a great opportunity, Mental Health Awareness Week, to talk about how being more physically active can support that in lots of ways. I hope Garnet and Ash would agree. We're trying to make the most of it in Sport England this week. It's a really important partnership. And finding ways to just build into the day the chance to breathe has been one of the most successful things for me. It is relentless. It can be dominated by other people's views of what you should be spending your time doing. So one of the most important things for me before I then get on to being active, which is I tend to go every Saturday morning religiously at 9 o'clock to the gym. That's my one time in the week when I know I'm going to be around and I can go there and enjoy that. Otherwise, outside in the fresh air, usually now just a dog walk, nothing more rigorous than that. But the most important thing for me is own your time for your mental health. It's really easy for other people to think that they own your time. And if you can own your time and just take a moment, just that 5 minutes to breathe in between things, to take a step away, to realize that when something's done, you can actually leave it behind, is probably the most powerful thing this week. Breathe, take a time, take a breath.
And last week was Sports Podge, right? That's a different type of self-care.
For those that know, yes, it's all part of the mix.
Lovely. Thank you. So, Tim, we're going to talk a bit about the subject, I guess, and your views on the subject. Now, terminology or not, verb or not, like I would just call it being a good human, right? And cheerleading for as many women and girls out there as I humanly can. But I guess in the spirit of channeling our Sue Anstis and some of that movement, talk to us about your background, I guess, in communication, about the importance of communicating sensitively in this space around women and girls.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually quite like, a bit old-fashioned as of yesterday, but I quite like the term allyship because I quite want to be an ally. I kind of feel that sense of purpose in realising that I can play a role actively in supporting women and girls to be more active and to create a sporting environment that has genuine parity. So the most important thing about allyship is the positivity of it. It's not sufficient to be neutral in that context. You have to take action. And I think the biggest single action that I can bring as a leader, and particularly in Sport England, is yes, of course, to think about practical things, and perhaps we'll come on to some of the investments and some of the people we support and the partners. but it's much more about how you frame the whole purpose of what you're trying to achieve. And that's where the language and the sensitivity comes in. There is a model for allyship. Lots of organizations use it. They talk about yielding, listening, learning, and acting as 4 pillars of allyship. But actually, in response to what you said, Mitch, I was in a conference last year in the other side of the world, actually, in New Zealand. And the speaker was talking more about environmental sustainability. It's probably relevant for Jess. But what he said was basically, learn some stuff, talk about it, and do things. And I think that's my definition of what you're saying, is really, in thinking about the sensitivity of how you approach an issue, try and understand it, try and understand what the barriers and challenges are, what's the data, yes, but also what's the human story side, what's the emotional side, what are the real day-to-day practical challenges that are faced. Actually then talk about that and understand where you can make a difference and then take that action. And language comes into it because we all have a frame of reference for language that relates to our own lives. And one of the most interesting elements of that is how exclusive that can feel. And there is I learned that as a non-disabled person working in disability sport, that actually language really matters, but it's the understanding of that can be so powerful, that actually talking in terms that are relevant to the humans, as you put it, opposite you, rather than assuming that they'll understand your frame of reference. And I think for me, that's why allyship is a good word still, because I want to be a positive ally. I want to use whatever I can, whether it's my responsibilities, my authority, my platforms, to be active in the way that I think about, learn, talk, and then act.
And I guess, unlike Hugo, as 2 white middle-aged men trying our best in this space, the declaration is a good starting point, like making that commitment in a public sense to say some of the stuff that we've heard about over the last 2 days and what Charlotte's talking about isn't good enough, and we will do our utmost to cheerlead, amplify, celebrate, lift up, light fires, shift trees, whatever it might be, and not just on International Women's Day.
Yes, and I've sort of learned about and love his sort of gold, silver, bronze, because there is that sort of judgment of what's enough in that context. I do definitely think for me, and you're right, as saying I was only comfortable almost doing this with you once we'd realised why we were here, which was to understand that allyship is a very important part of the mix in creating parity in sport and physical activity opportunity. And it's a role that you can play. And for me, I'm very comfortable thinking that my success factor is getting out of the way, ultimately, because that will be about the creation. We've talked about this before. The most important thing you can do, I think, in the context of leadership these days, when there's so much complexity, and there are so many people with attitudes and perspectives and experiences that vary from yours, is to create and then hold the space for those people to be able to make change. The presumption historically was that the leader makes the change, and the leader is the person who knows and understands and has more knowledge than everybody else and has to come in with the answer. And the opposite, I think, is true now if you want to be an effective ally, is you create and hold the space for those who actually understand the circumstances that you're trying to change better than you do.
You've talked a little bit about some of the people that have played a part in your journey, being a positive ally and being a cheerleader, the idea of going and learning and listening, more importantly. We talked last time about 2 ears and 1 mouth. Talk to us about some of the people, females, that have shaped and influenced your outlook on life and your outlook on the profession and your outlook on the world that we are all trying to shift from today.
I was delighted, by the way, that you gave Sue Campbell an achievement award last night, because she never gets any recognition, Sue. But I start in a professional context. I mean, personally, certainly, and I have a good ally now with Sarah, because I get to talk about work, and then we also, she tells me an awful lot of what I'm doing wrong. But the reality of Sue's impact on my professional career is profound. She's still somebody I classify as being one of my closest friends. I've spent a lot of time in this room with her in her extraordinary role that she's taken on in the last half decade around women's football. But if you know about where Sue sort of grew up and came from and how she brought to bear her life's work is basically shaping a sporting system. And so I think she's profoundly the most influential professional person on my career. I mentioned Liz as well. I learned a lot about being a leader from Liz Nichol. And then I've got colleagues now in Sport England, Garnet. I should talk to Garnet more. Give it 15 years and running rugby, I hope. But I've got a colleague, Kate Dale, who many of you will know, who is our marketing director. That's her title, but she fundamentally is the engine room and the driver of This Girl Can as a campaign. And I never come away from talking to Kate without a better understanding of what the issues and the challenges are. And I guess another professional relationship that was really important and powerful for me was in my Paralympic context. You need a leader of the team when you go to a games. You need what the IOC call a chef de mission. You need that person who is the leader of the team. And I worked incredibly closely across 4 games with Penny Briscoe, who's still and will be the chef de mission for Paralympics GB in Paris. And what Penny showed me was the relentless focus on how you do things is much more important than what. So I mean, I'm shaping through a professional lens rather than saying, oh, it was, Hillary Clinton or whatever. But actually those, as women, they've been profoundly and continue to be profoundly influential on me.
Super, thank you. I guess that folds in nicely to your role then as a leader, and particularly at Sport England. Depending on which day of the week, I'm sure you're getting hammered on one day from the general public or from governing bodies, and you're having a great day the next day. It's a difficult role, right? And the organisation is evolving. You talk about some of the rock stars in the building. Tell us a bit about how Sport England are living and breathing some of these principles as an organisation.
Well, I hope we are, because we're sincere in trying to be the change in one of the language that we used when we set up to basically create a much more collaborative sector, to recognise that we're only really going to impact meaningfully on the activity levels of the nation if we collectively understand what the barriers and the challenges are and then work together to resolve those and think systemically, which is, tedious on a Wednesday morning, but actually so fundamental. We are all part of a living, breathing ecosystem, and the factors that exist within that should be things that we're all thinking about. So what we're trying to do at Sport England is to work and behave very differently, which is to understand our power, if I can use that word, which is not only an investment, but in convening, in bringing people together, in creating the space, as I say, but also to create partnerships and a collaborative environment for people to feel that they can make a difference. And probably more than anything else, to be ruthlessly understanding of what the challenge is, which is we've been very good historically at creating the opportunity for about 2/3 of this nation to play sport and be active on a fairly regular basis, and we have been stubbornly inefficient at getting that final third active, and there are reasons for that, because the inequalities that are so stubbornly there are quite clearly embedded quite deeply in how things have been traditionally set up. So one of the challenge with Sport England at the moment is we're culturally trying to change things in order to overcome those barriers and genuinely see the differences that can arise. And we can see it still in the data. I think we've done huge amounts around women and girls sport and activity. But even 2 weeks ago in the latest Active Lives, there's still a 4 or 5% gap between men's activity and women's activity in the data. The same's true in the children and young people survey. So the journey, we're only halfway up the hill.
And Garnet touched on it with her question to Charlotte a minute ago. The idea of intersectionality here as well is an even more complex subject, but also one that you're grappling with. But refreshing for me every time I hear you talk about this, that you're acknowledging that you're not getting it right just yet. You're as an organisation, you're learning and you're trying your best. But it's come back to the system that others before us have created. We probably wouldn't create a system that we've now working in, and it's trying to undo some of that.
Completely. Progress, not perfection, I think is the understanding of where we can head. And actually, given what Garnet mentioned, I should probably also mention Vivine Taylor, who's Garnet's boss, who is somebody who I never come away from a conversation with Vivine without a greater understanding of what the challenges are. intersectionality as conceptually we're trying to bring to life, which is it's basically the realization that human beings have complexity around them, and that, there are factors beyond a single one. So we're not simply going to change things by saying we're going to focus on women's sport. We need to understand the circumstances in which those women are living their lives. We need to understand what other factors are influencing them, whether it is their race and ethnicity, whether they're disabled, whether they have other factors that are impacting on them outside of their sex orientation. So from my point of view, we're just trying to rebalance the fantastic sort of metaphor in the health, not metaphor, but the way of working that Professor Michael Marmot's brought into the health service, which is, forgive me for getting technical, but the proportionate universality, where we have a universal offer. Everybody should feel that sport and physical activity is for them. But we, Sport England, and we as a sector should be disproportionately focused on those who previously have not been so well served. And that's where you should put the majority of your focus, the majority of your effort. And that's what we're trying to do now with a strategy uniting the movement that has been clear that you do not do it overnight. Even during COVID, the drop in activity levels was 3%. So you close everything down and you still only see a 3% reduction in the numbers. So getting a 3% increase in the numbers is really, really hard at a population level. Plus remembering that every week we start from zero, which is one of the things in the data that I'm obsessed with and very few other people realise. It's just that we have no banked customers. We're not like Sky, where you sign a contract for 2 years. And everybody starts from zero with their physical activity. They have different complex lives. They have factors that get in the way. And we as the nation, therefore, have to make it easier and recognise that the people can fit it in a way that makes sense for them. And that's particularly the case disproportionately on those who previously have felt like, for whatever reason, the offer wasn't theirs.
And balancing that responsibility, is big, right? And the language that you use and the comments you made earlier on, going after a topic like this and doing more about it in a world, and you explained something to me last week at Podge about the negotiation you were having with DCMS about just doing something really simple. It's not easy, right? So that responsibility must weigh heavy when there's probably 50 people in this room that are like, can I just have 5 minutes with Tim? Can I just have 5 minutes with Tim? So how does that play out for you in terms of balancing all of those responsibilities to DCMS, to a board, and to the people that you fund, but also with the laser focus on we're getting after that 30-odd%?
Yeah, it just made me feel exhausted just listening to you. And for a start, if you want 5 minutes with me, fine. But actually, you'll probably get more joy if you have 5 minutes with Garnet or Ash, because actually they're the people who are, trying to make change on the ground day in, day out on behalf of Sport England. I have a genuine understanding of where I can make a difference. I think it was the Microsoft CEO that said a CEO should do what only they can do. And I'm still not there, but I'm trying every day to be far more relentlessly focused on what difference can I make in my role. And some of that is what you described, which is the difficult, complicated, sensitive understanding of the political environment in which we're operating, particularly currently, the landscape that we're trying to curate and support, the recognition of where resources perhaps are greatest needed, but particularly in as I come back to that ability to say, here's the space we're trying to create for others, we've got to protect it. A lot of my job, I feel sometimes, is in a positive way, albeit in quite, a challenging way sometimes, is to make things go away that might otherwise impact negatively either on the organisation or on the broader sector, whether that's politically or socially or economically. And that is much, much easier to do if you have a sense of core purpose, if you understand why, if you're motivated by that. And I think for me, it's very clearly, uniting the movement was a real purpose-driven strategy. When we move, we're stronger. Actually, let's just start there. And I think, therefore, when it becomes tiring or frustrating or in some ways sometimes quite challenging, having that sense of purpose as to why you're doing it, in the same way that when I had that privilege of being in charge of BPA for a number of years, just knowing that even the problems and the challenges were part of the mix, and if you embrace that, because the view is worth the climb, basically.
Challenging your inner Carol Dweck there. I'm impressed. Tim, you make some investments specifically around women and girls. Could you just air 2 or 3 of those with the audience in terms of the positive things that Sport England are doing and where they're making some investments to try and drive change in this space, please?
I think in 3 investment terms, in 3 categories is probably how I'd describe it. So we have a number of the sporting organisations where we're focused particularly around activity for women and girls. For example, the Squad Girls programme in the FA, Netball Her is a great example as well, in trying to think differently about the offer. But every sport and every organisation that we fund as part of our wider partnerships has an expectation on them through that funding that they're giving focus to women and girls. So that's a significant number if you take it in the round. We are absolutely interested in supporting organisations who can create, who can help us know things and talk about it. So supporting, for example, Women in Sport, supporting the Women's Sport Trust, and they've got some interesting data out this morning. Supporting the Women's Sport Collective, that's a more emerging, newer, I'm sure many members in this room, and the sort of Game Chambers podcast, and the way Sue Anstis has tried to build a network for women's sport. That's where money's helpful, right? Because a lot of these organisations, you can't fundraise against that sort of purpose as easily as you can if you've got a product to sell. And therefore, it's important that we resource those organisations to give them the capacity to move forward. And then the third tranche is where we're being very deliberate and directive about what we might think makes a difference. So you could look at This Girl Can as the ultimate intervention of that. The most fantastic, my predecessor, Jenny Price, was very much the driver of that in the first instance. The ability to set forward a campaign that can genuinely tell the story differently to how it was told before. We've still got enormous power and legs in This Girl Can, but there's some interesting offshoots of This Girl Can. There's I love a program called Studio U, which we have invested in quite substantially. It's an online platform for PE teachers and others involved in teenage girls in schools who perhaps don't enjoy sport and don't look forward to PE and aren't part of that world, and to create new and different ways to make activity interesting, exciting, relevant. And it's now being used in over half our secondary schools. And I think genuinely you can see in the data that we see in the surveys that it's hopefully making an impact. So things like the Studio U programme are sort of micro interventions in a particular way. And then the system partner and the campaigning investments are sort of the macro. And then in the middle of that is support for those organisations who actually can help us learn and talk about things in a way that we didn't before.
Super. Thank you very much.
Sounds coherent.
It sounds very coherent. Jess is just waving at me to say we've got a couple of minutes with some questions from the audience, and then I'll come back and close on a couple of leadership bits before we finish. So I'm going to vet this because I can see you all, and there might be some people that want to throw a rocket. But who would like to ask Tim a question?
Could we also just ask that if you do ask a question, could you just introduce yourself so we know where you're from and what your name is? That would be fab.
Like a human type interaction, Jess. That'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
Like one of those, yeah.
Absolutely.
Surely not.
Aha. Hello, Nazim.
Hi, Tim. Naseem Akhtar, Saheli Hub. I know you've been working hard on the This Girl Can programme, and we really welcome the focus on women and girls. I was just wondering how you are really focusing on the levels for certain communities who are never participating. So it's easy for me to say, South Asian women are the least likely to participate, and it hasn't changed in 25 years that I've been doing my job. So what kind of things are you putting in place to make that happen?
Specifically,
or to challenge that.
Thank you, Naz. Specifically, in terms of This Girl Can, actually, it was what we were talking about last week. We have to get a certain amount of permissions. I won't bore you, but to use This Girl Can in a very overt, public way. And the next focus for This Girl Can is specifically that. So, I hope that will become a very direct answer to your question. which is how can we think about more the intersectionality that we talked about earlier and specific groups of women and girls who are inactive through the campaign and be more directive and targeted in that way. But it is also so the Saheli Hub is a great example of a local community-based organisation trusted by the community, probably individuals in that community who have never heard of Sport England and certainly have no idea what we do. So we're going to, I think the next phase also of our, get slightly technical about what we're doing, but we're expanding significantly our investment into places. So Birmingham, where you are, Nazim, is, Nazim, sorry, that was one of the pilot areas. There were 12 of those. By 2028, we hope to be in 100 places where we're working very directly with the communities and finding those locally trusted organisations who can help, particularly some of the most inactive communities, to find ways to be so. And that's a really potentially powerful intervention because it's our taking our resources to those communities and listening to those communities and understanding organisations like yours, how they can help people better than is currently the case, rather than doing national top-down programs. So a combination of a national focus to the campaigning and then ruthlessly local focus to our investment.
So no T-shirts and M&S and no TV adverts in the middle of Coronation Street for Saheli Hub next time round.
Well,
Is there any other questions? Yes, please, Mitch. Oh. I can't see anyone with their hand up over there. Oh, sorry. Is that...
Mark Curtin from Lord's Taverners. Tim, cricket, the sport that I work in, has seen a massive explosion in terms of opportunities for girls and women and working really hard to create a lot more opportunities. Cricket held up a mirror to itself, if you like, over the last couple of years with the ICEC report telling us a lot of things that were really hard to hear, but important to hear and responding to. Do you think other sports, with a particular focus, I know the ICEC report looked at a number of things around discrimination and so on, but with a particular focus, given today's topic on women and girls sport, do you think that other sports should follow and have a kind of independent mirror held up to them to look at where they're not getting inclusion right, like cricket has done?
Thanks, Mark. I think far more profoundly they should be very aware of that it's not a report only about cricket, in the same way that the White Review was not a review only of gymnastics. In reality, it was holding a much wider mirror up. I'm not sure that it would... it's an interesting question because what you're talking about at heart is better understanding, right? Better information. Actually, the detail and the guts of the ICEC report is incredibly powerful, quite hard to read, particularly the sort of testimonies. If those of you who've, in a different context, not talking about women and girls, but if you look at sort of racism in sport, our own tackling racism and racial inequality in sport report that we did with other sports councils, there's a load of data in there, but it's the lived experience, it's the testimonies that are really the driver of the change that we want to see. And I think that's what the ICEC report did incredibly powerfully and well. And you could almost say to any sport, cross out cricket, write your name of your sport and see actually what it tells you. So whether or not every report, every sport should go into... there were circumstances that drove the White Review. There were circumstances that drove the ICEC report that probably made it necessary for those sports. But the last thing we should believe is that that's just about cricket and gymnastics. The issues that have come out of... we as Sport England, together with UK Sport, found, are now driving forward 19 particular actions that range from sort of governance actions to much more positive interventions coming out of the White Review for the sector as a whole, for the system as a whole, rather than it just being about what gymnastics should be doing differently. So, and I would say to those of you in cricket, and I know Laura's here as well, what's been impressive has been the diligence of the response of the sport to that. I know there were certain, past heroes of ours who had a very different view about whether or not it was an effective report. But the bottom line is what cricket is doing is genuinely trying to work and behave differently, which I welcome.
Good question. Tim, we are being ushered off shortly. I just wanted to close. We talked a bit, the two bits that I've learned from you over the last 12 months about making and holding space. The other one is this idea around next 10 words. So we're at a conference, we're talking about activism, we're talking about actually getting stuff done. Just explain to people briefly, if you can, the idea of your next 10 words leadership philosophy and how perhaps the audience, beyond us departing imminently, could actually take that forward.
Yeah, so showing my age, those people who might have watched The West Wing, which was American political drama, and in the middle of Series 4, just to get nerdy, there is a re-election campaign, and the president, the sort of main character, President Bartlett, is in the presidential debate, and he's up against a sort of folksy Republican type guy who just is all for, corny aphorisms and short sentences. And he comes up with one in the debate where he says something like, I'm going to cut taxes because I believe the American people know how to spend their money better than the government does. And everyone cheers, and it looks like he's winning the debate. And President Bartlett just looks at that and he says, there you go, you see, that's the problem. So those 10 words, they're so easy, they're so powerful. It looks like they've answered the question completely, he says. He looks at his opponent and says, what are the next 10 words? What are the 10 words after that? You tell me those and I'll drop out of the race, because those are the things that tell you that you actually have got something that you believe can work, that you believe you've thought through. It's really easy, and we can contextualize it to this, to have 10-word answers. Yeah, we should definitely make sure that sport is equal for all women and girls. Probably is about 10 words. What are the next 10 words? What are we going to do after that, saying that, to make it a reality? What are the 10 words after that? So I took that, I got quite a distressing amount of my leadership philosophy from the West Wing, but I took that really, really, really profoundly into my professional life. And I say it all the time in meetings. What are the next 10 words? Because unless you can really unpack what you mean when you say something convenient or something obvious or something that no one's going to disagree with, you're not really helping. You're not contributing to the debate. You're not being an ally in this context if you just say, we've just got to be better at making it equal for women and girls. That doesn't help. The next 10 words, the 10 words after that, are the things that make change.
Ladies and gents, Tim Hollingsworth, thank you very much indeed.